this is a really unique situation here because I'm lucky enough to have grown knowing both of these people here. So we're going to talk about, Black history, but we're going to talk about it from the perspective of us all growing up in San Francisco, which is not something you really see, right? When you come across conversations like this, it's very rare. So I want to first introduce Sophie Maxwell, who I was so lucky to have as the first example of a district supervisor, a Black woman district supervisor coming up in San Francisco. And a lot of what Sophie focused on were things that, we still really are trying to work through today. Whether it's workers' rights, it's housing, it's the overall health. She focused on the things that matter to D10 the most, just us trying to have, a better life, just to live in the neighborhood. So we'll talk about that, but I want to introduce everyone or say hello to District Supervisor Sophie Maxwell. Now this one, I actually grew up on the same street as him. I talk a lot about growing up in District 5, but a lot of my childhood was also spent in the OMI on Arch Street alongside this guy right here who I played Nintendo with. Any sort of console that came out, we played, and he kicked my butt each time. So I grew up, going to the same elementary school, and then everybody went off to different high schools, but just an exceptional person, and really glad to see him engage in politics and what he's doing now. So everyone, EJ. Ernest Jones, right on EJ. And me. So a lot of you may know me as a person that's worked for the San Francisco Standard, but has also done some other community work. The reason why I got into journalism is because a long time ago, I used to work in PR, and my stories focused on people of color and Black communities. And when I was trying to get places like the San Francisco Convention and Visitors Bureau, which is now known as SF Travel, to write about the Fillmore and the Bayview, they wouldn't do it. So I was like, well, I'll write it myself. So I started writing for a publication called Hoodline, which then I introduced, readers to the Bayview district, stuff that was happening in Fillmore, and I just kept growing. Now I write for a major publication called the San Francisco Standard. Don't hiss at that, we're trying it. I don't. All right, anyway, so that's my why. Sophie, what made you decide that you wanted to become a politician?
Well, I think it was probably my mother, but it was also a number of other people that were there, certainly before me. Ella Hill Hutch. Ella Hill Hutch was a woman, she was in the crafts, and so I kind of looked at her and I followed that. And I think when you talk about Black history, African-American women in San Francisco go back, way back. Mary Ellen Pleasant. There's another name people call her, but I would never even mention that name. She was Mary Ellen Pleasant, and she considered herself a capitalist. And she capitalized on everything. I mean, this woman had restaurants, she had, you name it, laundries, and she also had another side. And she would, the other side. Anyway, she had this 30-room house that she built. And she had women in there, and of course, women and men, in the 1800s at that time. She had a good business going on, very, very strong. And so there are memoirs from General Vallejo that he borrowed money from a negress, and that negress was Mary Ellen Pleasant. She was an abolitionist. She sent money to John Brown. So Black women in San Francisco, and they were here because it was a rough, tough place where they could really get a hold, and they took advantage of it. And so when I look here, I see LaTanya Bryce is following in the footsteps of the history of Black women and Black people in San Francisco. So that's why I got involved, because we needed to change things. As you mentioned, you know, the air we breathe, the water we drink, anything that has to do with that, Black people and in that community were at the bottom of the list. So, you know, we had to do something. And my son died. He had cancer, and, you know, and I said, oh, wait a minute. And so that's another reason why I got started.
I'm a great environmentalist also.
Absolutely. EJ, tell us about your why.
Yeah.
And what you're doing now, what you're up to. Tell us.
Okay. Before I start, I do want to acknowledge that Mary Ellen Pleasant was the original owner of the Geneva Car Barn in District 11, and gifted that space to the city of San Francisco to establish the railway system that we have. So that's a really cool just piece of fact that we have on how African American folks have shaped the city of San Francisco. Currently, I serve as the Director of Community Affairs in the Office of Mayor Daniel Lurie. And people all ask, well, what does that mean? What do you do? What can you do for me? Really, the role is supposed to be a bridge between community and the mayor's office to make sure that there's engagement, to make sure that there is a connection, to make sure that people have a voice within the administration. A few years back, we had something called the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Services. It went away. And so we are looking to recreate something in that same vein that allows districts and communities to have a focal person that they can call when they need something within the mayor's office. Maybe you don't have a relationship with your supervisor. This is another opportunity and avenue to get involved in government. You know, my journey started in Lakeview. Born and raised here in San Francisco. My father was a bus driver and my mother worked in San Francisco Unified School District. And you know, I think my why was a necessity. I saw over the years how the community changed. I saw how many of the people who have fought for things in our community have begun to be excluded from conversation. And I didn't want that to be lost. So I knew that I had to get involved. And I started just doing community work. Some friends and I started handing out sandwiches out of backpacks on Saturday mornings after going out on Friday nights. And that eventually turned into me getting involved in the nonprofit world. And then I realized that you have to advocate for dollars. And then that requires talking to your local supervisor or your city official. And so I had to figure that out. Then I got into affordable housing and realized that is another political fight that we have to have in City Hall. And so eventually it just became something that was natural. I realized that politics are a part of everything. And so just kept pushing, kept doing the work, eventually started working for Supervisor Sophie, learned a lot there. And then from there, it took some time off, and it was really community who came to me and said, hey, we need representation. We need someone like you to run for office. Ran, it didn't work out, but landed on my feet in a space that I think is perfect for me. And so happy to be here.
I think it worked out perfect.
Perfect.
I know it's you know, tough to run for office and not, you know, secure the seat, but I feel like God put you where you need to be.
I agree.
Yeah. Growing up in San Francisco, so I lived in a bunch of different neighborhoods, but D10 is where I spent the majority of my time. And I would say, like, for me growing up, whenever I'd visit any neighborhood that had predominantly Black community, it was just a really fun experience. You go over to Divisadero, right, which they call NOPA now, but we know it as the Western Addition, right? And there was all these African businesses, there was hair braiding, there was barbecue, there was all these wonderful places you could go to. It was, I mean, everybody was Black when you walked up and down that street. You smell the food, you hear the music, you know, it's just a community. It doesn't look like that anymore. You go over to OMI, I remember going to the center and they brought Danny Glover and I wouldn't talk to him. They said, why won't you take a turn? I said, because you were the Whoopi Goldberg. You know, but just those little experiences And then coming over here to District 10 where we have water fights, 3rd Street, you know, it was a vibe. It was, those summers were great. You would have a good time. You know, you'd see everything. That's what it was like for me growing up in San Francisco Black. Just access to everything, having cousins that aren't really your cousins, but you know, you just grow up calling each other that. What was it like for you, Sophie?
Well, I think if you remember, with me, my folks came here and a lot of their friends for prosperity. They came here for jobs. They came here for a better life. And a friend of mine has this saying, if jazz could talk. But these people brought with them this desire to work. They had a work ethic and they wanted to prosper. They took San Francisco and at its word, it's liberal and open. So that's what they came for. And they worked hard. And we started, I remember the Carolina Projects. It's over Potrero Hill. And that's where Enola D. Maxwell is, my mother's school, the school that's named after her. But that's where she started. And my grandmother, our cousin came first and their cousins came first and they bought flats. And so they sent for my grandmother and my mother and then they came over. And I remember my grandmother telling me the story that her cousin said, Lena, I got you a job at a laundry. She said, what? Girl, you know, I don't know how to fold anything. What do you? She said, well, I got Otha Faye is coming over here and she works there and she's going to show you how to fold those clothes. So my grandmother got the job at the laundry. And then she said, and you know what? The lady I work for, her daughter needs somebody. And so my mother got a job. And so they came here to work. They came here to work for prosperity. And then moved in the Carolina Projects. Well, all the people there were from somewhere else and they were there as a safety net. And then they worked 2 Jacks. I don't know whether you remember 2 Jacks, but those were neighbors of ours. And they bought a house, the Perrys, all right? And we used to visit them and they would visit us. And then they went on to do other things. Most of those people went on to do other things. That's why the Fillmore, that's why Divisadero, because these people came from places where they were. Jazz was there, the music was there, the food was there, and then there was a community to buy it. And that's what I remember growing up. I have the same way you did. But my mother and my grandmother bought flats too. And then they got moved from the projects. They bought flats on Harrison Street. Then they bought flats in the Haight-Ashbury. Then they did the same thing. And that's what these people did. That's why there was a community. That's why you felt what you felt, because they were there together. And it was definitely a community. And that was our heritage. Our heritage was hardworking, prosperity, buying land, buying property.
I agree. When I think about my family's history, my grandmother came from Winsboro, Louisiana. She came during World War II, worked in the shipyard. She told me she made $14 a week and she would send half of it home to her mother. Eventually sending for my great grandmother, who was an actual descendant of slavery, to come out to California. My great grandmother settled on Bright Street in Lakeview. My grandmother settled on Lobo Street in Lakeview. Eventually raising my mother and making way for me. And so growing up with my grandparents, I remember taking trips across town to Fillmore to go to the meat market and supporting Black businesses. On Sunday, my great grandmother and my grandmother were proud members of St. John Missionary Baptist Church on the corner of 3rd and Newhall. So on Sunday, we went to church and you had community. You did things together. The people from church were your family members. And you know, I think even you and I were raised in a very similar manner. Meaghan and I grew up next door neighbors, but we would often, you know, go to each other's houses, hang out, spend time together. And although we went to different high schools and different times, we still have, you know, a real bond and relationship. My experience in San Francisco was, I think by the time I made it to my teenage years, it was different. My friends were starting to leave. They were being priced out. There was a change that happened and it was noticeable. And I think it had an adverse effect on a lot of the people our age. I think it changed our perception of San Francisco. While we had a love for this city, it changed the way that we viewed it. And it made us want to shape something that was for us. And so I can see why the younger generation wants to have that entrepreneurial spirit. It's something that's ingrained in us from our ancestors, but we want to build that community that we saw, that we lived prior to the changes that happened here in the city.
And that's why a lot of us still live here. You know, you might have a friend that's living in her mom's and dad's basement because they just want to stay. That's not me, but you know, some people want to stay in the city.
And we also held space here. We had Black space. There were venues for us to go to. There was entertainment for us to enjoy. I often think about my grandfather. He was in a social club called the 10 Cavaliers. And he tells me that they were the first ones to bring Red Fox to San Francisco. And he would park cars at the club in order for them to let him use the space on the off nights to bring Black entertainment to San Francisco. So that was just something I felt like I had.
Yeah, and there's a man, Charles Burke, and he had the master lease of what we call the Fillmore Auditorium.
Yes.
Remember the Fillmore?
Yes.
And that's where he brought in people. He brought in Ray Charles. He brought in all of these people. San Francisco was the place. I mean, it was way out west, but it was, Basin Street, it was if jazz could talk.
Right.
If jazz could talk. And we brought all of that. That was money. That was for money making things. We were part of the economy, a big part of the entertainment.
Sophie, what do you think the biggest misconception is of Black San Francisco, and something that the media should pay more attention to?
Well, I think, as I mentioned, the work ethic and why people came here in the first place. And as was mentioned, there were jobs, people were working. And then I think what's happening, I'm concerned about San Francisco in our diversity as far as jobs. I mean, if you only have one base, and that's a tech base, and we see what's happening to that, we manufacture nothing. We make nothing here. And there used to be a time when there was Ham's beer, there was all kinds of things going on. And so we need to think again about our diversifying our economy. I mean, because the tech thing can just last so long, and that's a lot of PR. It's not as deep as they say it is. And AI is just another way for them to get some more money on top of whatever else they're doing, because they're losing money. I mean, there's enough is enough. People have what they need. And so I think we need to really reconsider how and what we're looking at as far as San Francisco finance. That's why when we lost the music, that was an economic boom. We no longer have the arts. That was an economic boom. And we were so much a part of that. And when I think of hair, there were beauty shops all over the place. I mean, that's how Black women were able to buy homes and make money. And so I think we need to reconsider and rethink about what we want San Francisco and what makes a thriving, what makes your city continue to go, because the way this is going, it's unsustainable. You don't have families, you don't have kids. We lived down the street from our grandmothers. I never knew a day without mine. I never knew a day. She took me to school. My mother had to work late. So we have that. And now, luckily, because of one of the mayor's programs, my grandson is not too far from here. And so I'm able to see my great-grandchild. But that's not common. And it should be, because that is how you are sustainable with the city and the family. That's what you all are talking about.
Absolutely.
That's Black history.
Black history. BJ, what's your perspective? What does the media get wrong about Black San Francisco?
Everything. But I think something that I witnessed firsthand in my time, and I'm sure you witnessed it as well, is that Black people can't have fun safely here in San Francisco. And you know, going back to what we talked about, how we owned and we held space and we had bars, we had restaurants, we had clubs, and people were having a good time. That is something that attracts people to communities and attracts people to cities, right? And there was a period of time in San Francisco where you could not go out and hear music that you could relate to. It was banned in a lot of spaces, intentionally. And so I think this past weekend, and I stopped in here this past weekend, but all of the city really thrived during All-Star Weekend. And I think it proved that we can have fun, we can have space, and there could be 0 incidents if you just provide us the same level of opportunity, of support, of resources that you provide every other business here in San Francisco. So I think that's one of the things. And then I think people forget that we are here, right? There's a group called Still Here 415, Still Here San Francisco. And, you know, I think in order for people to realize that, we have to take up space, right? We have to show that we're still here. And so that's why I get really excited about businesses like this that are open, when we have large scale of community events. I think all of those things really help to change the narrative around what San Francisco can really do.
When we prepped for this call, Sophie said something that was really profound. You know, I asked them both about how they feel about the percentage of Black people in San Francisco, which I believe is at 4. And Sophie said, I don't play the numbers game. Because when you count us, you count us out.
You can discount.
You discount us. Okay, I was close, but it was still really good. So yeah, I understand that. So when it comes to preserving and promoting Black culture, something that the media could eventually get right, what's your hope for the future of Black San Francisco culture, or culture of Black San Francisco?
Starting with me?
Starting with you.
I think we're sitting in it, right? I think we have to have businesses. We have to have an economy that supports our community. I think that we have to create a network of opportunity where we are celebrating businesses throughout San Francisco that can provide the feeling, the community that we once had. I also hope that we get to a place where we don't have to demand things, where we are kind of the first thought in the conversation. You know, obviously, I've been in a lot of rooms in my life, and I sometimes have seen how the sausage is made. But I think it would be a really nice day in San Francisco when folks think, oh, how can we do this and make sure that the African-American folks in San Francisco are taken care of first?
Sophie, what do you think?
Well, I'm not going to look back the way it was, because I think we're in a whole country right now where everybody's looking back to the good old days. Well, those good old days are not necessarily good for me. Yeah, they weren't necessarily good for me. And so I want to look forward. And I think there's so much that we can do now, and so much that these young people have at their disposal that they use. I mean, there's some great entrepreneurs. I mean, when you look online, these young people are just off the hook, and they're worldwide. And so we can maybe provide and think about, how can we provide a space in all of that? And I think we have to look beyond just this community, because there's so few. We got to broaden our perspective. And one reason why we had African Americans coming here is because it was a space, it was a place. But we're not coming here anymore. I mean, when I was on the board, we went to somewhere with some group, and you know, and when we were in New York, and there were all these Black people sitting around, and I was up there with people from here. Oh, excuse me.
Helen.
No.
Helen.
Anyway, I think that we have to look differently at things. You know, this is a different time. And we have to look differently at what community means. I walk the lake every day and there's a community there. I ride my bike on the Barcadero and all over the city on Saturday mornings. There's a community. People that I run into all the time, that's community. So we have to look at community differently. We have to look at, I mean, I have a little great grandson and you wouldn't know what he looks like a little Indian, okay? And so that's community. And my niece was here and her kids are from Germany. And they speak 6 different languages and they're standing in the baby on the porch. That's community. That's community. And so we have to broaden what we mean. And if we broaden it, but know who we are. You know, you have to know who and your history so that you don't get confused and nobody else gets confused. You know, there's a big pot, but you want to be able to taste a little bit of asparagus in that stew or whatever you put in it. You know what I mean? You want it to stand out. So you've got to know who and what you are and not be confused because you add. San Francisco was always this wonderful place because you could get Italian food. Well, you still can. We're diverse in food, if nothing else. We may not be diverse in people, but we're diverse in food. You can get any kind of food you can imagine. Well, that's why you have to remember that's what made San Francisco. And if they're not here, if you don't sustain that, we will not be, we won't be any different from Pleasanton. Oh, well, heaven forbid, I don't know about that, but we will be not what we were. We will not have the place that we had. So it's extremely important. This city has changed and the tolerance has changed because these people from the Midwest came and they brought their values instead of taking on ours. And if our young people are on the street, they are not comfortable.
Right.
And so that's just the reality of it. I mean, I wish it could be the way, but you know, we got,
Well, we have a foundation. I agree with you. It's trending away from it, but I think that the diversity and the finishing that is what we really need. How do we connect as a community?
And I would say for, you know, something about my upbringing and here in San Francisco, that was, while I feel like I grew up in an African-American community, I had neighbors of all walks of life that lived on my block, in my neighborhood. So I grew up experiencing many different cultures, many different things. And going back to what I would like to see for San Francisco is that I would like to see San Francisco become the city that is accepting of all cultures again, because I feel like you, some of that has changed. I know, you know, I've spent a lot of time working with youth and youth feel, and maybe it was the pandemic, maybe it was the separation of that time, but there is something that changed recently.
median income of San Francisco has changed. You can't just live here. Nobody can just live here. Either you already have a place or you're 1.2 million and it's a shack.
It's exclusive.
No, it's a shack.
Exclusive. Yeah.
Because wealthy people only want to live around each other. So they're going to make sure. Oh, I don't want to get there, but I just think that there's places, there's things that we can do. What can we do? That's what we need to think about.
Absolutely. I think holding space like this is important,
And
you know,
supporting it.
and supporting each other, supporting businesses like this one. So, you know, I volunteer to continue to moderate these discussions and work alongside community. I think it's helpful to also be in the media to get that background so I could share, you know, with my colleagues. But really, I just want to thank Supervisor Sophie Maxwell. You know, we're a spirited group. We have a lot that we have to talk about and work through. So let's just commit to continuing to do that. So thank you so much, Bruce.
Can I
Thank
just say
you.
one more thing, that
Yes.
Black history is American history.
That's right.
And Black history is American history, and that's why it's important to have Black History Month.
That's right.